Welcome in to another episode of my Dynasty Fantasy Football YouTube. Today, I've got some 2025 Dynasty stashes. As always, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Let's go. So my first player, Adonai Mitchell. Now, Mitchell is such a bizarre player to me. He was a prospect I liked, drafted into the literal absolute worst situation possible. This year, in 17 games, he had 23 catches, 312 yards on 55 targets, 1.4 catches, and 18.4 yards a game. Safe to say it wasn't a good rookie year. But considering the Colts had three other wide receivers with over 800 yards, it could have been worse. Now, why am I looking at Mitchell as a 2025 Dynasty stash? Well, he did have a strong prospect profile and pretty good advanced stats, actually, better than you might think this year. So in his final year at Texas, he had 55 catches, 845 yards, and 11 touchdowns. He was also an early declare, and he's still young. He doesn't turn 23 years old until October. So still a very young player, time to develop. Now, the interesting thing is, when Mitchell played, he was targeted a lot. On the routes he ran, and when he was out there, he had a 27.1% target rate, 14th among wide receivers in the entire NFL. So the issue was playing time. Now, you could say, well, not earning playing time, that's bad. Yes, it is bad, but I'd actually rather have someone who, when they were out there, was used, but didn't earn as much playing time over someone who earned a lot of playing time and did nothing when they were on the field. And then why did Mitchell's targets not translate into more catches? Well, he had a 50.9% catchable target rate, 102nd among wide receivers. The low catch rate is not his fault. I have not seen a mark that low doing content all year. He only had 28 catchable targets out of his 55. So whose fault is it? Anthony Richardson. Will that change? Maybe not in the first few weeks of 2025, but if it doesn't fix itself, it will change. So Adonai Mitchell, a player I would keep on my radar as we move through the Dynasty off season. Next player, Ben Sinnott. So the point of this segment is not to discuss what Sinnott did in 2024. There's nothing to discuss, but more to remind ourselves of why I liked Sinnott in the first place and why there might be some future hope for him. In 2024, he did nothing. 5 catches, 28 yards, touchdown on 5 targets. Zach Ertz was the clear starting tight end. Even John Bates played more than Sinnott and produced more. Wasn't much, but Sinnott wasn't even the tight end 2 on the Commanders. So why am I talking about him? Well, there's a lot that he did. He produced a lot for a college tight end. In 2023 at Kansas State, he had 49 catches, 676 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Led the team in receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. Rare for any college tight end to produce that much. And he had decent production in 2022 and had second-round draft capital. All of these things say he's more likely than not to be a successful NFL tight end. Now, Sinnott still turns 23 years old in June, so we know that tight ends break out later than other positions. It's not impossible he could break out. His rookie year was a bad sign. Yes, people are going to point to players like Trey McBride or whatever. He was worse than Trey McBride. He literally did nothing. So we can't just say, well, it's going to happen. But we also can't rule it out. Now, both Zach Ertz and John Bates are free agents this offseason. I don't think the Commanders are going to bring Bates back. Probably retain Ertz. But I wouldn't be shocked if Sinnott gets more involved. It would be hard not to be more involved in year 2. Remember, this regime drafted this player who produced in college. Not an old regime. This regime drafted this player to have a role. I would be surprised if they didn't get something out of him at some point. Again, stashes are often for value increase, not necessarily putting them in our lineup. So something to consider, that there might be a value increase even if there's not an actual fantasy starter in Ben Sinnott. Now, next player, Jameis Winston. So we all saw Winston at the Super Bowl. He talked about going to the Giants. Can you imagine Jameis Winston playing with Malik Neighbors? Now, we know that Jameis Winston is not an NFL starting quarterback. He's not. He is a borderline starter, but you're not going to win anything with Jameis Winston as your starting quarterback for real life. But for fantasy, he is exciting. He played 12 games. He started 7, 61.1% completion, 13 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, 7.2 yards per attempt. He did add a little bit on the ground. this was more the reckless Jameis Winston of old, the Tampa Bay Winston. Yards per attempt is not bad, but we saw 12 interceptions, not such a high completion percentage, took 24 sacks. This was the reckless player that for fantasy we loved. I mean, remember the big Jerry Jeudy game? That came because of Winston. And what did that result in? Finishing as the top 12 fantasy quarterback in 4 of his 7 starts. As always, he had fantasy viability. Boom bust, but viable. And one of the bad games was that snow game. So, I mean, this is a pretty good fantasy player. Now, why is he a dynasty stash? Quarterback market. There are not enough quarterbacks in the 2025 NFL draft to fill all the vacancies. There are going to be a few teams who don't get a week 1 start. I mean, the Giants are one of them, potentially, if quarterbacks go 1 and 2. Browns, if they, could decide to bring Jameis Winston back. I'm not feeling like that's going to happen. And then there's the Titans if they decide to pass on a quarterback at 1. And of course, the Jets, if Aaron Rodgers retires, a couple other teams. The Steelers could be in the mix. If Winston is going to start week 1, his value will rise, even if it's as a placeholder. Of course, I want to sell him at that point because we know Winston is not going to be an actual NFL starter. This is not Sam Darnold. We've seen Jameis Winston enough times over. We know what Jameis Winston is. So, again, we're looking for the value more than we're looking for an actual long-term dynasty asset. But I want to throw him in the mix just because he was in the news at the Super Bowl for his media appearance. Now, if you like my YouTube content, you should sign up for the Patreon. Right now, I'm offering a 50% discount at all tiers using the code TylerYT. You get my rankings, access to the Discord, and, all my write-ups, and the ability to ask in advance questions for the YouTube videos. Tiers begin at just $6 a month, $3 with the discount, and include all of that plus options for direct message fantasy advice at higher levels. If you want to know more about the Patreon, check out my why you should join the Patreon videos on the channel. I'm going to level with you. The 19-minute advertisement got people to sign up for the Patreon. These videos are not doing that. So if you want more videos, less advertisements, I would love it if people actually signed up for the Patreon from these videos. But if that's not going to happen, we're going to see another 20-minute advertisement dropping on the channel in a couple of weeks because it seems to be the only thing that brings in consistent patrons are those advertisement drops. Again, not my favorite thing to record, but it works. I can't, go against the data. So, I would really appreciate it if people do sign up. Again, I'm not taking any questions in the YouTube comments. If you want my help with Dynasty trades or Dynasty startups, that will be for patrons only. That's not going to change. That's not a temporary policy. That is permanent policy. And, it is what it is. But I do offer that 50% discount as an opportunity for people to try it at a lower price. So let me know what you think. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them about exactly what you get for being a patron. With that said, moving to my next player. So next up, MarShawn Lloyd, who basically did nothing in 2024, and he was injured. Now, if I had to choose, again, we kind of talked about this earlier on a different note, but this is the same with injuries. I'd rather a player be injured than be active and do nothing. I'd rather them have missed time being hurt than we saw the team didn't like them. Lloyd played 1 game. 1. He had 6 carries, 15 yards, and 1 catch for 3 yards in week 2 against the Colts. Played 10 snaps, but got 7 touches. The Packers made an effort to get him involved, even though he was coming off an injury in that game. So Lloyd had a lot of unlucky injuries. He dealt with a hamstring injury in the preseason, went to IR for an ankle injury in week 2, aggravated the hamstring, and then had an appendectomy, forcing him to go on NFI. The appendectomy popped up right when he was going to return. Obviously, that's not something we're concerned about in the future. Now, Lloyd did have an ACL tear in 2020, but his entire college career, which he was drafted in the 3rd round based on, no incidents. He had 1 little bruise in his 2nd year that caused him to miss a couple of games. Otherwise, clean injury report. No injuries I could find in his 3 years in college other than that 1 bruise. So this is not someone who spent all of college injured. He had 1 major injury in 2020, a long time ago. And then this year was a nightmare. But I wouldn't call this someone where I'm concerned about his injuries for 2025. He'll be healthy to start week 1. He did not have a major injury this year. No ACL tear in 2024. Nothing broken. Nothing like that. That concerns me for next year. Now, the Packers have Josh Jacobs, and they did have Emmanuel Wilson, who was great as their RB3. They need to stop using Chris Brooks because Chris Brooks sucks. But they can bring back Emmanuel Wilson. He's an exclusive rights free agent. And they have Lloyd. I really don't see them spending money, forget that, with Jacobs' contract, or high draft capital at RB in 2025. I think they're going to give MarShawn Lloyd a chance to be the backup. Maybe it doesn't work, but I think he's going to get a fair chance. And if he's going to get a fair chance, that means he's going to have dynasty value next year. It's that simple. So if people are saying that he's worthless, we haven't seen whether he could be good or not. Maybe he's good, maybe he's not, but we really don't know. So he's someone that I'll maybe be targeting as a throw-in in trades along those lines. Now, my last player, Chig Okonkwo. Sometimes it takes tight ends a while to break out, and Okonkwo has had kind of a weird career. This year, 52 catches, 479 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3.1 catches, and 28.2 yards a game. 52 catches is probably more than I think people would think Okonkwo had. The problem is that he doesn't do much per catch, or as much as we'd want because of the quarterback play. Hasn't had a lot of touchdowns because of the quarterback play. And that's kept him off the fantasy radar because the Titans have been a bad offense for all 3 years of his NFL career. However, people do remember that Okonkwo hit in the fantasy playoffs. In those 3 games, averaged 7.3 catches, 60.7 yards, and 9 targets. He was amazing. But once again, he did not score. And because he did not score, maybe he wasn't the league winner in our minds. But those target numbers are crazy for any tight end. Now, why do I have Okonkwo as a dynasty stash? He's still young. Turns 26 years old in September. And tight ends do break out later in his career. But also, we're not saying, looking at Okonkwo and saying, well, this is a player who's done nothing. He's been there. All 3 years, he has at least 450 receiving yards. Now, is that great? No. But it's not like I'm saying this player who's never produced anything in his career is now going to maybe be relevant. In the fantasy playoffs, he was relevant. And he's been there all 3 years. We did see in the fantasy playoffs a breakout starting. Now, is it going to be 7.3 catches a game? Probably not. But could he be more relevant than he's been in the past? Yes. And I haven't given up on Okonkwo. So just a player that, again, throwing in trades. If you need some depth at tight end, someone I would consider targeting. Dynasty stashes for a reason. We're talking about players of a lower level, but he's definitely a player in the mix. Now, unfortunately, this dropped on Monday after I was done recording my Monday video. But we learned that the Rams informed Cooper Kupp that they will trade him. Kupp has 2 years left on his contract. The Rams would save $12.5 million by trading him. The acquiring team would owe Kupp $20 million in 2025 and $19.85 million in 2026. None of that 2026 money is guaranteed. I would say at $20 million, Kupp's draft capital that he's worth would be negative. I think he's worth less than 0 at $20 million. So if the Rams want to get any draft capital for Kupp, there's a bonus. There's a couple of things they can do to eat some of that money. They're going to have to do that. Otherwise, they're going to be releasing Kupp because no one's going to trade for Kupp at the current cost. So they'll either have to release Kupp or eat some of the money in a trade. Now, let's say there is a trade. Possible destinations include the Steelers, the Bengals, the Commanders, Broncos, Chargers, and Cowboys. I think we can rule out any teams in the NFC West. I don't see an in-division trade happening. Any other team I think is possible. These teams were all plus 800 or lower when I looked. But if you notice, Kupp is not going to be the wide receiver 1 on any of these teams. I think Kupp is going to be more of a slot wide receiver wherever he goes, help a team enhance their 11 personnel, play a 65 to 70% snap share instead of what he was playing with the Rams. The Steelers are commonly linked. I do think Kupp would kind of be a good complement to George Pickens, and then they get another player to play what they wanted Mike Williams to do. The Bengals, I think, would be another one. Kupp would be good working in the slot, and then they could find a cheap replacement for T. Higgins as the outside wide receiver 2, or Yeah, probably that's what they would have to do. Regardless, I think Kupp is going to be the second or third weapon wherever he goes. Now, what do? To me, with this kind of thing, you wait for Kupp to be traded. Wherever it is, people will say it's a good thing. It always causes hype. Oh, yes, woo, exciting. Not exciting. There's a 32-year-old wide receiver. He'll be 32 by the time the NFL season starts. Changing teams. How many times has that worked out? Ever. It's Terrell Owens, and that's it. Literally end of list. Terrell Owens, Jerry Rice, who was a lot older, but, that's it. Changing teams. Those two of the best wide receivers ever. Even Randy Moss, once he started to fade away with the Patriots, never did anything after that. So at this age, Julio Jones finished when he switched teams, circled the drain for years. How's DeAndre Hopkins looking at 32? Bad. And Cooper Kupp looked washed down the stretch. He's done. The odds say he's done. And if you just bet against every 32-year-old or older wide receiver changing teams, they pretty much all fail. Adam Thielen is like the best case scenario in modern times. And even that, is that exciting? No. So whatever it is, sell at that point. Now, I've got a couple of Patreon questions. First one. Do you think old running backs performing was an aberration or something that will continue with better technology and sports medicine? So I think it's mostly an aberration. We'll start with the aberration part. It's because the 2024 rookie class was so bad. You can go into the metrics, but it's been published many times. It is the worst rookie year from a rookie running back class in recent history. The worst, but not a little bit worst. The worst by a mile. For example, the running back 2 in the class, Trey Benson, went to the Cardinals and did nothing. 0 to James Conner's value. What if it was the running back 2 in this class? Whoever it is, let's say it's Amari and Hampton. James Conner's value would have been obliterated, finished, gone. So that's the outlier. It's that the 2024 rookie running back class was outlier level bad level. That bad. It was horrible. It was the worst rookie running back class maybe in my lifetime. Now, there are outliers. Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry. Those are outliers. But expecting to get more years out of James Conner, Aaron Jones, that might be a risk. And to address the medicine part, nothing to do with it. Old running backs were a thing in the past. Actually, old running backs were more common in the past. Look at Tiki Barber. His best years were 20. He wasn't all that great. And then best years of his career were 28, 29, 30, 31. So, no, it's not new. And no, it's not repeatable. Yes, really good players might beat the odds. But expecting Aaron Jones, James Conner, even Joe Mixon, really wasn't all that great efficiency-wise to beat the odds. And it has nothing to do with better technology in sports medicine. That makes all players better, not just running backs. How important is it for a tight end to be a competent blocker, and how does it affect his value? So I will say this. I saw Jacob Sanderson say the same thing. Very smart guy. I agree with a lot of what he says. But I'll say it myself as well. If you cannot play tight end, you become a tweener, like Dalton Kincaid or Kyle Pitts, and you end up sharing snaps with another tight end or not playing tight end. And that has worked at times. You have Evan Ingram, you have Darren Waller. The majority of fantasy football valuable tight ends actually play tight end, not a wide receiver pretending to be a tight end. There are players who are just good enough as blockers, but are so elite as receivers, it doesn't matter. That's your Travis Kelce, your Brock Bowers. These players do play tight end. Are they great blockers? No, but they're good enough, passable, but they are elite as receivers, so teams are willing to take the gamble. The majority of fantasy relevant tight ends are the other type. They are good blockers. They're capable of playing the position. George Kittle, excellent blocker. Rob Gronkowski, excellent blocker. Tucker Kraft, really might be better as a blocker as a receiver, honestly. TJ Hawkinson, very good in that area. Trey McBride, nothing wrong with him as a blocker. Sam Laporta can play every down. So, yes, it affects their value, but if you're so elite, if you're Travis Kelce, if you're Brock Bowers, it won't matter. But that is how good you have to be. If you can't block, you have to be Travis Kelce or Brock Bowers for it not to matter. And most tight ends are not Travis Kelce or Brock Bowers. So that's kind of my answer to that question. We got to be wary of the Kyle Pitts, Dalton Kincaid types. We see that those do not work. Are there any rookies you find yourself higher or lower on than consensus, or is it more speculation until we see the draft capital? So it's not that we see the draft capital. It's that, honestly, the problem is actually with the second part of the higher or lower. It's actually the consensus. It's too early for me to know what consensus is. I don't know what consensus is yet. I don't have a good handle on what that is. So in general, after the draft, I'm always higher on the disliked players who got draft capital, but that's every year. That's every year. So that's always something. I'm always going to be higher on the quarterbacks in Superflex than most, but that has nothing to do with the quarterbacks in this class. That has to do with the strategy of valuing quarterback in Superflex. Yes, I will almost certainly be higher on Cam Ward and Shadur Sanders, assuming they get the draft capital, than most. But again, that has nothing to do with Cam Ward and nothing to do with Shadur Sanders. That has to do with how I value quarterback in Superflex versus other positions. But yeah, I don't even know what consensus is, so I'm not sure I can comment on that yet. Now, if you like the video, make sure to support the channel by subscribing. And don't forget to hit the notifications bell so you can be notified about all my exciting content as it drops. Of course, if you want my best fantasy football advice, it's available on the Patreon. Dynasty and rookie content year round. 50% discount at all tiers using code TylerYT. You can sign up there. Patreon.com/fantasy advice. Click the link. Every sign up helps support my independent content. And yeah, again, if we want year-round content from me, we're going to need to see more people sign up for the Patreon. Otherwise, we're going to be getting more 20-minute ads, which I really don't want to do. So please sign up and prevent those from occurring. But once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all later.